Hi guys and gals, I just wanted to take a few minutes to share with you some techniques that I recently figured out for both terminating and splicing polybraid electric fence wire. In my particular case, I'm using PowerFlex polybraid, but the splicing techniques used can create a loop on the end to terminate, and also joining broken strands end to end. The reason that I'm needing a loop on the end is because my wife and I are sick of tying knots at the end of the fence. So I got some of these insulators and put cables on them. I think Gallagher has something very similar to this. What makes this different, however, is if you look where I've marked, you can see that I've cut grooves in it, or file grooves in. I actually did it on both sides, but I only put a marker in the bottom of a couple of them. So the reason for that is that I can take this loop now, put it through that hole, stretch it over, and then no knot involved. And it's just as quick to undo, take it off, and pop it out. And if you've not seen these before, they are just an insulator that has cable fixed to it. So you can put it on a fence post or pipe or whatever. So the tools that you're going to need to do this, they call them FIDs. They are essentially hollow needles. I will say the ones that I got off of Amazon, I've got a 4mm and a 5mm and a 6mm, but they're only hollow to about there, maybe 3/8 or 1/2 of an inch. So I actually put these in the lathe and bored them out to about there, at least halfway, because otherwise the fence is kind of tough to keep in the center of it. It does have some threads, don't know if you can see them, that creates a little bit of grip, but it's not quite enough. So you need those and a good razor blade, and you'll need a marker as well. So let me get this turned around and I'll show you the splicing techniques for both the terminal loop and for grafting the two ends back together. My wife and I just got into rotational grazing a few months ago, and we were originally using these fiberglass rods. They're actually stakes that you buy for marking driveways and things like that. They're 5/16 inch fiberglass rods. I think you can buy them in a 100 pack, and they come out at about 70 cents a piece. And then I just 3D printed these clips for holding the wire. And then I made a slide hammer, as seen here, for installing the post, because they're pretty flimsy compared to a 3/8 inch fence post. But even the 3/8, are pretty flimsy. They bow quite a bit whenever you're putting them into hard dirt. So I created the slide hammer and 3D printed a sleeve, a liner that goes inside of it. So it stabilizes this so it's not able to flex side to side as it's being driven in. And there's also no impact to the tip because this is always in contact with it. So you're not mushrooming out the end of this. And there's also a Delrin or HDPE plug that I put in there to soften that a little bit as well. But the problem is that we were stringing the fence first, obviously, so we had our straight line, and then we were going through and installing these posts, and the slide hammer would pinch it between this and there, and we cut, I don't know, I think ended up cutting one of the reels twice, and another one we broke once. So then we were having to tie knots like this, and it's very unsightly. And I just have a thing against, I don't know, I'm just particular. So I don't like having knots. And it was creating a legitimate problem in the sense that we couldn't pull a knot through here as we were tensioning the fence. So then we would have to go find where it was hung up at, etc. So that wasn't working for us. So I was looking for a solution, and I couldn't find anything online. I didn't see where anybody was doing anything other than essentially tying knots, various knots, you know, square knots, bowline knots, whatever. I don't know all my knots. But I got to thinking about something I learned whenever I was trying to put some Dyneema synthetic winch rope onto my climbing sticks in place of the ratchet straps. And I learned how to splice and to terminate the line in loops for that purpose. And I thought, well, this is a hollow braided rope as well. The only difference being that it has a core, but nevertheless, same principles applied. So I went to experimenting and figured out that I was in fact able to splice them like I showed you initially back together. So what I did here was I took my half-mile reel. And by the way, I don't recommend getting half-mile reels. It's way too much. We're gonna break it down and only do quarter miles, but that's beside the point. I took and cut, I don't know, what is that, about 12, 14 inches off of it. And I'm going to put a loop on the end of it and then graft it back onto the spool. Reason you have to do it this way is because you have to run the longest end of the short tail or the short piece through itself in order to put this back on. So that's whether you're splicing the loop on the end or if you're splicing two broken lines back together. So do keep in mind that you have to really want this. If you split your reel right in half, if you cut it in half, then you may potentially, in this case, be having to drag a quarter of a mile of tail back through itself. So it's ideal if you don't have to do that. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and show you. I did go ahead and remove the core from this end that I cut off. I wasn't initially going to go through the trouble of showing y'all how to put the loop on the end, but I'm going to because that's just the sequence of events here. So what you need to do is first determine how big you want your loop to be. Mine is dictated by what it takes to get around this. So it needs to be a little bit bigger than that. So I'm going to say something like this. Then you're going to take your marker, and that is going to be where you need to split the line. So you take your fid here and you find your marks there and there. Again, that's where it's going to come together. And you want to take the shortest end of your short piece and feed it into the fid. And then you kind of scrunch that up and push it through. Okay, and the important part is that your mark on that short tail come through the strand. And then you press that together and feed your fid through. And just try to evenly divide all the strands. Then you take the longer end of your short piece, put it into the end of the fid, and pull it through. So you're left with something like that. And then you just pull it tight against itself, and then you can see that that is interlocked. So there's no way that it can come undone short of the actual rope breaking itself. But then we've got this tail that we need to deal with, and we need to feed it back through the inner lumen or the hollow portion of the braid. So we need to just keep make a mental note about how far you need to go. So we're, what, 1.25 inches or so, which is approximately half the length of this fid. So we'll need to, you do want to make sure that you're going adjacent to this. Obviously you don't want to come around the side because that's not where it wants to naturally lay down. So, and then you want to come up basically as close as you can, and you're not going to push the fid all the way through. Again, you're going to go down through the lumen and you just have to press it like that to feed it through. So you want to go far enough that you're going to completely be able to bury the tail, but not so far that you can't grab the end of it when it's all scrunched up on itself. So now that we've got that, you take and tuck it back up into the fid. And it doesn't really matter if all the strands are perfectly in there because they'll come through. And then just feed it through and keep that scrunched up so you can grab a hold of it just like that. Let's see, we got all of them pulled out. And you just want to be sure to pull that tight, because if you don't grab this tail, you could still bury it in there, but you're not going to get it to get the diameter of the rope down tight, because like I said, I think I said earlier, it's like a Chinese finger trap. So, you know, you scrunch it up, it gets big, and you pull it tight, and it's tightens down on itself. So once you have that, go ahead and pull it like so. And there's your loop. Okay, and then we're gonna graft this on to the end of this. And the reason that we have to do it this way is that you, again, would have to feed the longest tail of the strand. You could do this, but you'd have to feed the entire reel through itself in order to do this. So you shortcut, in this case, a ½ mile of pulling rope through in order to get that loop. So then what we're going to need to do here, we've already got the core out of this one. And I will say, I did a simplified version here. Sometimes I will leave the core in this portion so it has some extra support. I don't think it's necessary unless you're terminating it on something where you're having a really acute angle. In my case, I'm not. You know, it wraps around this entire thing, so there's no really sharp angles where you're flexing that wire hard back on itself. But anyway, so this one's already hollow, and we want to take this and we're going to go back approximately 4 or 5 inches and take the core out of that. Now, in order to do that and not disturb the rest of this, scrunching it back up on itself, I tie a knot just so whenever I grab this core, it's not pulling all of it back through here. It's only affecting the portion distal to that knot. So I just spread that out a little bit and grab that like so. Pull out, 4 or 5 inches. And take your knife and cut that. And then smooth that all back out. And you can untie your knot now, or you can do it later, it doesn't matter. So then we're going to go approximately half the distance of the hollow section of that. So, 2.5 inches. And we're going to scrunch it up and go through it with the fid. Use my smaller one here. Okay. And the same with this one. About the same distance back from the end of it. And then we'll take this one. You always start with the long piece and push it through the short one. And go through to where either your mark or your hole is, depending on which order you went in, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that it's all the way through itself. And then this part is a little bit more challenging because we have to get this whole loop through this segment. That's where the 6 millimeter fid comes in handy. And in this case, I'm not going to try to stuff that loop into the fid. Instead, I just dilate it and push it through like that. And then we pull it back on itself. Give you a little better shot of how that works. So we just want to pull that tight, and we kind of smash this down. And then the process is the same for burying the tails. So we're going to go about to there. And it's easier to push it back on itself than it is to try to stuff the needle through or the fid through. I'll go a little bit further beyond where that should end, where that tail should end. Okay. And push it through. It's kind of a push and pull process. You just want to make sure that that tail stays as deep in the fid as possible so you have something to grab onto there. And then before you go ahead and bury it, again, you want to go ahead and put tension on that. You want to pull it tight so it contracts back down on itself and is as small as possible. And then you just pull it on through. Okay, so that's one side done. Flip it around here and repeat the process. Sorry, I haven't tried to do this with the camera between me and it until this moment. So with this, you do gain a little bit of diameter. When the tail is buried, it's going to be 40 or 50% larger in diameter than the original rope. But it's not twice as thick because we've removed the core, and then the hollow braid is actually taking the place of the core. Oh. About lost that one. Well, we'll start over there. too far. And if you end up doing that, just pull the tail back out. Don't go as far the next time. And try again. I don't think there's anything you can do that actually makes this catastrophic. Other than, I guess, if you end up burying both of the tails and pulling it tight, it'd be pretty tough to undo it at that point. But like you saw, I was able to recover that without much difficulty. So then we're just gonna pull that down in there to bury it, snug it up. And that's about as close as we could have got. I don't like that. So there's another way to overcome that issue. So then we're left with that. I can't imagine ever breaking that. And other than aesthetically being nicer and not having the knot, you can see that we've got that much, so what is that, 4 inches approximately, of full contact, with creating much better continuity than if you were to tie a knot. Because if we were to tie a knot, even if we have really good conformation or deformation to where it tightens up on itself, you're getting at most 35, 50% maybe contact on that. And if we were to mark the knot, and undo it, that only involved, I lost my knot, but you get the point. Oh no, there it is, my marks. So involved that much wire, and you're only getting about, say we'll be gracious, 50% of contact against itself, as opposed to 4 inches of 100% contact against itself. So I've measured this with the multimeter, and I had no increased resistance, and it was about 10 feet. I compared a solid piece from the factory versus one that I'd spliced a loop onto and grafted back together. So anyway, there's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.